Okay, part 2. Library committee member Get. The next day's lessons were math, theology, and magecraft. All three were building upon topics we had discussed the year before. And the fact we had studied so far ahead meant that they were of no concern. The Ehrenfest second year seated in the auditorium all seemed bright and sunny. In math, we were tasked with using a calculator to solve problems involving numbers of many significant figures. I had learned to use calculators exclusively for this exam, although Ferdinand had explicitly instructed me to continue using my stone slate before the test and to use written math to double-check all of my answers. I had also studied things like duchy budget ledgers and tax percentages, but they weren't particularly difficult. The material covered was at a similar level to what children would learn between 3rd and 5th grade in elementary school. Anything more advanced was reserved for the scholar course. I learned a lot helping in the temple, so I actually feel really confident with my math, Feline said with a sparkle in her grass green eyes once the tests were prepared. That seemed to remind Wolfried of something, as he grimaced just a little in response. By helping in the temple, do you mean helping Uncle? He asked. Yes, Lord Wolfried, I've gotten much better over the past year. Well, you've been going to the temple, Feline? Roderick asked, his dark brown eyes widening in a mixture of disgust and bewilderment. I couldn't help but smile at how predictable his response was. Nobles really did look down on the temple. I am the High Bishop, I said. It is only natural that Feline would visit the temple as my retainer. Hartman and my apprentice guard knights do the same by day. You would do well to consider this if you wish to give your name to me. Even after receiving words of warning from Matthias, Roderick had resolved to give me his name. He was striving to socialize more with my retainers, Feline chief among them, and would sit as close to me as possible during classes. He had announced his intention to become my namesworn. My retainers made no attempt to push him away from me. Instead, they watched him with sharp eyes, evaluating his every move. As expected, we finished the math test without any problems. I had told everyone to double-check their answers by calculating them in reverse, so I doubted there would be any mistakes. This was much simpler than helping Lord Ferdinand, Feline said with a small smile. I was not scolded for my mistakes, nor was I made to redo any of my work. Yay! On her first day she spent helping in the temple, Feline had struggled with math since she wasn't used to it and wilted from her anxiety. Your math is wrong. Start over, Ferdinand would say, and she would mercilessly be told to redo her work again and again, but all these mistakes and the experience she had gained from them had made her far more competent than she once was, and she now understood that the emotionless looks she had received from Ferdinand were certainly not ones of anger. Theology next, huh? Wolfried muttered. This should be easy. I mean, it's freaking religion. This is what Rosemine is known for, is her blessings and the prayers and stuff. Our first task was to learn the name of the primary god of whatever season we were born in, alongside their subordinate gods. We then picked another primary god and their subordinates alongside what they governed. It was probably a nightmare for those who were completely unfamiliar with the names of the gods, but my Carta and picture book Bibles meant that all the Ehrenfest second years were more than prepared. This test was another easy win. Rosemine, which will you be writing about? Wolfried asked. Those who had only one elemental affinity could pick any primary god and their subordinates, but those with multiple had to pick from the ones they had. This was because it was important to learn about the gods whose divine protection you were best able to call upon, which would be relevant in our third-year lessons. Since I was born in the summer, I needed to memorize the names of Laden Shaft, the god of fire, and his subordinates by default. Then I needed to pick up one other. I had all affinities, so I could pick any one I wanted. My choice here is obvious. There's only one god I really want the divine protection of. Shitzaria? Yes, I knew it, and I plan to choose Wind and her subordinates as she deals so intimately with libraries and books, I replied. The god I wish to offer the most prayers to is without a doubt Mestanora, the goddess of wisdom. That's pretty like you. I plan on going with water for my birth season and fire to pray for more growth. Wolfried said it seemed that he wanted to mature and grow stronger. What about you, Feline? I asked. I only have one affinity, which is earth. For my other one, I'm going to pick wind, the same as you, Lady Rosemine. I want Mestanora, the goddess of wisdom's divine protection as well. It certainly would be nice for scholars to receive divine protection from the goddess of wisdom, I mused. And you, Roderick? Roderick looked around enviously and then shook his head of tawny hair. I was born under wind, and my only other affinity is earth, so I have no choice in the matter. I envy you, Roderick, Feline said with a vexed sigh. Having the affinity will make it easier for you to get protection, even if you don't get to choose what to learn about. Roderick blinked a few times and then muttered, right, as though he was seeing his situation from a whole new perspective. It seemed that he had been so jealous about everyone else getting to pick that he hadn't realized the problems his classmates were facing. All passing grades for Ehrenfest came the professor's call. Much like our other subjects, theology was completed with that incident. I ended up feeling nostalgic for the days when I first entered the temple as an apprentice shrine maiden and was brought to tears by the unbelievably long names of the gods that I was made to remember. This year's Magecraft lessons were all about the basics of magic circles, and thanks to everything Ferdinand had already taught me, again, dang dude, he is preparing you for everything you could come in contact with, so it's a lot less harder for you. I had no issues. I simply needed to remember the symbols and warnings for drawing a magic circle. The warnings were about elements that were dangerous or had unique effects when combined. I just needed to remember that life will react violently to anything but earth. Okay, that makes sense. Actually, that does make sense in the context of Avaglabe, the god of life, versus Gadul, the goddess of earth. He'll react violently to anybody else because they try to keep him from her. So, of course. The magic circles we second years were going to be drawing in our practical lessons were generally simple ones of a single element. The few more complicated circles used several elements, but only ones that work well together. Things would get much harder in the scholar course. After concluding our morning written lessons and passing all of our tests without issue, we moved to our afternoon music practical lesson in the small hall. I looked around and saw that the crowd was now thin enough for me to recognize individuals, though I still struggled to remember their names. This is the song that you will be playing today, Professor Pauline said as she smacked some sheet music onto a large board. The sheet music began growing in size until I could see the notes even from far away. You will also need to perform one other song that you are particularly familiar with. During our first year, when our practical classes first began, everyone had stuck with the others from their duchies as they would during their written lessons. Soon after I passed my test, however, the students all started to socialize and get to know one another. They were now mingling with one another regardless of duchy. Once the professors had given us our work, a quick look around revealed that everyone was practicing with the friends they had made the year before. Wolfrid picked up his harpspiel and headed straight for a growing throng of boys, among which was Ortwin, while Hannelore went to speak with a large group of girls. What should I do? It would be easy to pick up my harpspiel and head over to Hannelore's group, who would most likely welcome me, but there was a chance they would want us all to practice and pass together. That would make it harder for me to pass in one go, and then immediately stop attending. Since my aim was to unlock the library as soon as possible, I decided I was better off playing on my own. It's a little upsetting that everyone is going to view me as a loner, but I'll do what I missed. The song we were required to play was one that Ferdinand had given me to learn almost half a year ago, so after just a little practice to refresh my memory, I was confident that I could pass. As for the one that was my choice, any of the songs I had learned around the same time would be sufficiently complex and well-known without boosting my reputation. While everyone else chatted and practiced, I swiftly warmed up and then approached the teacher. I wanted this over and done with as soon as possible. I didn't even want to think about how sad I would look if she made me return to practicing alone. Professor Pauline, may I perform the songs? I asked. She was the professor who had invited me to a tea party last year. She had started playing her own harpspiel after giving us our work, but she stopped to blink at me in surprise. Oh my, Lady Rosamund, are you truly ready to play so soon? I am. The test song is one that I've already studied, I said, taking the seat offered to me and running my harpspiel. I could feel the eyes of the others falling on me against my wishes, perhaps because I was the first person taking the test. The buzz that had filled the small hall quieted in an instant. Taken aback by the sudden tension, I took a few deep breaths to calm myself and then strummed the strings of my harpspiel. High notes from my right hand and low notes from my left danced through the air. Very good, Pauline said when I was finished. I had passed with ease thanks to having continued my daily practice in the temple and the castle. You have grown much more over the past year, she continued, but despite her praise, she was looking at me with narrowed and dissatisfied eyes. I must say, though, your choice of song was quite uninspired. I had been hoping that you would play one of your new songs, Lady Rosamund. Do you simply not have any more? There were plenty more original songs I had made at Rosina's request, but I had no intention of drawing any more attention to myself. Had it not been for Wilfrid spilling the beans last year, nobody would have known about them in the first place. Debating another one of my own compositions here, or debuting another one of my compositions here, would only make me even more of a laughingstock, turning me from a loner into a loner who was trying much too hard to impress everyone. Instead, I wanted to finish class as soon as possible and disappear. If anything, my goal was for everyone to forget about me entirely. Unfortunately, I have no songs that I am willing to debut here. Then we shall have another tea party this year. I would like to hear your original music again, Lady Rosamund. Do bring that musician of yours. I am ever so glad that you enjoy my music, Professor Pauline. I, too, am proud of my musician. Now I have a tea party clogging up my schedule. I can only pray that it won't be a royal in attendance this year. Here's hoping not. In any case, I had successfully passed. I just needed to kill time somehow until the end of class. I looked at the others and noticed that Wilfried, who usually didn't care too much about instruments, was glaring at his sheet music with his mouth bent into a frown. The group of girls were chattering even more than before, their hands barely moved at all. Bleh, if only I had a book, then I wouldn't mind being a loner. A harpsichord just doesn't cut it for me. I had nothing to do but practice music, so I returned to my seat and started adjusting my harpsichord. That was when Hannelore came over, looking rather timid. I blinked at her and she smiled at me in turn. Maybe she was worried about me being all alone? Just a thought seemed to brighten my entire world. That's Hannelore for you, my truest friend. To think you had passed this quickly, she said. You must have a talent for the harpsichord as well, Lady Rosemine. Oh, no, I simply have a strict instructor. I would rather spend my time reading books than practicing the harpsichord, but for some reason things never seem to work out that way. If not for Rosina requesting that she be allowed to work as my personal musician, and Ferdinand frequently assigning me songs to learn and checking my progress, I would have trashed the harpsichord a long time ago to secure more reading time. I also need to pass quickly, otherwise I miss my opportunity to visit the library before the dedication ritual. I continued. I can't have that. Schwartz and Weiss are waiting for me. Are they the large shoemill-shaped magic tools assisting Professor Solange in the library? Hannelore asked, looking at me quizzically. I nodded in response. It had seemed pretty obvious to me, but perhaps their names were still unknown to most people. Hannelore put her hands on her cheeks and let out a dreamy sigh. Schwartz and Weiss are positively adorable, she said, unable to hide the sparkle in her red eyes. Last year, the very sight of them working in the library was enough to soothe my heart. All of a sudden, her eyes shot open as though she had snapped back to reality, and she began peering around us with a worried expression. Her light pink pigtails swayed with each turn, and as I watched their hypnotic movement, I thought back on our conversation. Had I said anything that Hannelore wouldn't want other people hearing? I was desperate for an opening to invite her to the library committee, sure, but I hadn't actually done it yet. And I haven't made any of the mistakes I used to make back on Earth, right? I didn't forget to zip my trousers up, and there weren't any price tags on my clothes. My attendants had taken great care in dressing me as they always did, so I couldn't imagine there was anything wrong with my clothes that someone might notice. I reached up to feel my hair. My hairpin hadn't fallen out either. Hannelore stepped forward, still eyeing the crowd around us. I swallowed hard and waited to hear what she had to say next. Lady Rosemine, she eventually said, keeping her voice low. I've been meaning to apologize to you for quite some time now. Aside from my abrupt collapse at the tea party, I can't think of anything that you might feel the need to apologize for, I replied, unsure what she was referring to. Hannelore shook her head. Not for something I did, but for Dunkelfelger, she whispered. Her voice was so hushed that it was almost inaudible above the strum of the practicing students. But she explained the circumstances behind Lestalot demanding ownership of Schwartz and Weiss last year. When I saw how cute they were, I whispered that I wished to be their master instead. I now know that Lestalot troubled both you and Ehrenfest as a result. By the time I was made aware, the prince had already become involved, which truly surprised me. To summarize, upon hearing his cute little sister whisper her dream to be Lord of the Shoe Mills, Lestalot had started on his epic quest to steal Schwartz and Weiss from me. Would y'all be quiet? What a pain in the neck. Show your brotherly affection some other way, man. On top of that, I am told that Professor Roffin has been incessantly challenging Ehrenfest to games of Ditter. Hannelore continued, I am trying to stop him, but I fear he will continue to pester you. I am ever so worried that you might begin to hate me, Lady Rosemine. Why would I hate you? There were tears in her eyes, and she started to apologize for not having apologized to me sooner. Ah, my heart, Lady Hannelore is lethally cute. I should have known that my fellow bookworm friend would want to own Schwartz and Weiss too. This is my only opportunity to invite her to the library committee. It's do or die time. I could not fathom a reason to hate you, Lady Hannelore, I said, looking up at her from my seat. You said that you wish to be Schwartz and Weiss's master, correct? In that case, you may join me in the library committee. Hannelore tilted her head in confusion. When is the library committee? A group that assists Professor Solange and provides Schwartz and Weiss with mana. You love books too, do you not? We would love to have you. Hannelore received my straightforward request with wide eyes, and then rested a contemplative hand on her cheek. It certainly does sound enjoyable to spend time in the library with Schwartz and Weiss, she said with a smile. Heck yeah! Library committee member get! I had been wondering when I would get an opportunity to invite Hannelore into the library committee, and fate had dropped her right into my lap. I had suppressed my urge to leap into the air and strike a celebratory pose which would no doubt become a prayer to the gods, and instead just clenched my fist victoriously. Lady Rosemine, Hannelore said, I do have one shameful request. Yes, I replied. She was a fellow library committee member now. I was ready and willing to grant whatever her wish might be. I would, like to have my personal musician play the song that you are said to have composed, she muttered, fidgeting all the while. Would you permit this? It seemed that Pauline had performed my original song during music class last year, and Hannelore wanted her musician to learn it. Her request was for me to teach them Rosina's songs, as I had taught the music professors during our tea party. Hannelore's musician playing my song would serve as proof of our deep friendship, so I nodded with a smile. Shall I teach them at the planned tea party for sharing books, I asked. We can each bring our musician. I thank you ever so much, Lady Rosemine. I look forward to the next time we trade books, Hannelore replied. Working in the library with Lady Hannelore, having tea parties with Lady Hannelore, trading books with Lady Hannelore, I'm not alone anymore. Yay! She's got a friend! Thank God. Once our lesson was over, I exited the small hall to warm dreams of my promise made with a true friend. Riardo was waiting outside of my retainers, and Cornelius gave a small chuckle when he saw the look on my face. I suppose you were successful then, he asked. Yes, I replied. I passed music as well. I did too, Lady Rosemine, Feline reported as she walked up to me with a smile. Her chest was puffed out and she was so excited that her cheeks had turned rosy. The professor praised me and said that I had gotten much better since last year. It's all thanks to you practicing with me. Feline had been practicing with me in the temple under Rosina's guidance, so she had progressed unusually quickly for a lay noble. A new teacher would mean nothing if you did not take your studies seriously. Your skills are the result of your own hard work, I said to Feline. I then turned to my retainers to report on the fruits of my own labor. After giving me my passing mark, Professor Pauline invited me to a tea party. I also made various meaningful promises with Lady Hannelore. I am a star socialite, am I not? Oh no. Are they going to assume the worst here? My retainers all widened their eyes, shocked to hear that I had prioritized socializing over the library. Of course, this wasn't really the case. My socializing today had come under my duties as a member of the library committee. There was no need for me to point that out, though, so I simply remained quiet and smiled. We easily passed the next day's written lessons as well. There was nothing surprising about that since we had spent a year studying what students normally learned over a single season. From an outside perspective, however, it was entirely abnormal for every member of a duchy to pass their lessons on the first day, and with such consistency. Orden walked over, making sure to flourish his emerald green Jerwanko cape. Wilfried, is Ehrenfest still passing everyone on the first day of each subject, he asked. Yep, Wilfried replied. We're expecting this trend to continue for the rest of our written lessons. We can't afford to lose and miss out. Miss out on what? Ordwin asked curiously with a noble-like smile. Wilfried seemed to realize then that he had said too much. Don't worry about it, he replied. It's an Ehrenfest secret. Indeed, we have no plans to bring tarts to the Royal Academy. Wilfried had replied so evasively because we had no intention of spreading my tart recipe, but to the students of Jerwanko it must have seemed like we were hiding some grand secret. Their eyes began to gleam in an almost frightening degree. A secret in Ehrenfest that's boosting your grades, huh? Ortwin said. Don't think you can hide it from me forever. I'll get to the bottom of this. You're welcome to try, Wilfried shot back with a smirk. Okay. Have fun, you two. Registering for the library and supplying mana. During this lunch break, I was visiting the library for the first time in a long while. I was bringing the first years to be registered, and seeing them line up in the common room brought a smile to my face. It will cost you each one small gold to register in the Royal Academy's library, I said. I am willing to lend money to those who simply cannot afford this cost. You may then settle your debt to me by working hard on transcriptions. The common room's bookcase contained a copy of the book catalog from Ehrenfest and records of the books that senior students had transcribed the year before. I cautioned the first years to pay extra attention to what we had and what others were already working on, such that we did not end up with unnecessary duplicates, and they responded with eager nods. I finished my lunch in a hurry, and then proceeded to leave. After visiting the library, I would need to go straight to my afternoon practical lessons. Does this mean you are accompanying them to the library after all, Lady Rosemine? Cornelius asked once I was ready. He was giving me a look that made it clear he had seen this coming, but still really didn't want to go. Would it not be strange for me to remain in the dorm while students from our duchy are going to get registered, I asked. I implore you to reconsider. You registered last year, Lady Rosemine, so this matter has absolutely nothing to do with you. She still has to give Schwartz and Weiss mana. And the first years are already going to have Lady Charlotte with them as an Archduke candidate. I think it would only be both bothersome of you to bring so many of your retainers to Professor Solange's office. There we go. Perhaps, but I still need to supply Schwartz and Weiss with mana, I retorted with pursed lips. Cornelius shrugged. Professor Solange hasn't sent word that they were running low. He wasn't wrong about that. We had given Solange some face stones packed with mana, so there was no real need for me to visit her today in particular. But I wasn't going to surrender my one chance to get to the library before I finished my classes. Why are you being so spiteful when you know how much this means to me, Could it be that you were rejected by your sweetheart, I asked, fixing him with a stern glare. Cornelius' eyes shot wide open. No, he cried, rejecting the idea instantly. Have you chosen someone to escort, then? Both you and Hartmut are 6 years now, I said, noting that honor students would naturally be popular with the girls while looking between them. Upon hearing my words, Cornelius and Hartmut exchanged glances, then nodded at each other. They even went as far as to exchange a firm handshake, one signifying a bond that not even time could break. Hartmut looked down at me with a smile. We shall not tell you, Lady Rosamine. But why? I exclaimed, having not expected him to flatly refuse me. Because you would leak everything to Mother, who would then use it as material for her books, Cornelius replied as he looked over at the bookcase. I couldn't follow his eyes exactly, but I could guess that he was focusing on the collection of romance stories Elvira and her friends had written. Royal Academy love stories. In short, Cornelius was concerned that his personal experiences would be used as fodder for the second or third volume of Royal Academy love stories, and I could understand why. Elvira had written about Lamprecht and Morelia's romance with an excited smile on her face. She had swapped out the names, and the inserted songs entitling the gods made it hard to identify who was who, but those who knew it, knew. It was pretty much guaranteed that Cornelius would receive the same treatment. Incidentally, Lamprecht's story had turned into one of two lovers ripped apart by social forces, only to end up together when the gods answered their prayers. It had undergone such liberal rewrites that it was mostly fiction by the time Elvira was finished with it. Her powers of delusion was truly a sight to behold. I understand your wish to not be used as material for a book, I said, but you will surely need to greet your partners sooner or later. This is especially true if said partners were from another duchy, since Cornelius and Hartmut would need to speak to their their parents before the interduchy tournament. They were just buying a little time before Elvira inevitably found out. Fear not, we will take care of that while you are away for the dedication ritual, Hartmut replied casually. Judging by how breezy he and Cornelius seemed, they had probably settled on partners already. I glanced over at Lenore, who had previously spoken about having feelings for Cornelius. She was looking down at the floor such that her grape-colored bangs obscured whatever face she was making. Why are we even talking about this, Cornelius sighed. I already wanted to prioritize finishing my classes so that I can accompany you on your soon-to-come daily visits. Then you may remain in the dorm, I said. I will go with Judith, Lenore, and Charlotte's retainers instead. Cornelius let out another heavy sigh, shook his head, and looked at me with careful eyes. No, I will accompany you, he said. I've been told not to let you out of my sight when possible. I wanted to ask by whom, but stopped myself. It was probably Ferdinand, or Sylvester, or Florencia Karstedt, or Elvira. As all of those names passed through my mind and inadvertently out my mouth, Hartmut's bright orange eyes grew distant. Ah, he said with an apparent realization, I received the same instruction, and from many others as well. There were your temple attendants, Daniel, Angelica, Lord Eckert, Lord Justice. Then upon my return to the castle, there was Mother and Lord Bonifacius. Okay, I said, I understand your perspective. It seemed there were a lot of people who viewed me going to the library as an event requiring such observation. In that case, Lady Rosamine, Cornelius began, however, no matter what others may think, I will never get up on the library. Let us hurry there at once. It's been so long since I was last there, I can't wait. Woohoo! There's no reason to be concerned this time, Riarda said, sounding somewhat defeated as she opened the door. We have some empty face stones from my boy Ferdinand. Charlotte put the board we received from Professor Solange through the hole in the door. I instructed I could enter the library freely because I was already registered, but the first years needed Solange's permission. Yes, sister. Charlotte slid the board through what was essentially a mail slot, looking rather tense all the while. The doors creaked open a few moments later. We started down the brightly lit hallway. The first years were unable to contain their amazement, and then entered the room at the very end. Solange was waiting inside much like last year, wearing a peaceful smile. This time, however, Schwartz and Weiss were there with her. It's good to see you again, Professor Solange, I said. I'm glad to see you well, Lady Rosamine, she replied, her blue eyes crinkling as her smile deepened. She was the very image of a grandmother seeing her granddaughter for the first time in a while. I see you have grown since last year. Huh? Have I really grown so much that you noticed at a single glance, I said? My heart was overflowing with joy, but Schwartz and Weiss hopped over before she could answer. Milady is here. Welcome, Milady. They're large shumils, one of the first years whispered. They can talk? Another asked in a hushed voice. It was their first time seeing Schwartz and Weiss, and their surprise was more than apparent. Charlotte stepped forward as the first year's representative. Sister, are these Schwartz and Weiss? She asked, her indigo eyes sparkling as she followed their movements with her eyes. I heard about them before, but they are even more adorable than I imagined. Indeed, I replied with a smile of my own. I could see Laisletta watching with a doting expression at the corner of my eye. You and the others must not make physical contact with them, though. They are protected by several magic circles meant to prevent them from being stolen. A simple touch could only result in sparks, but if you continue, things will surely escalate. It was to be expected that someone would eventually bump into Schwartz and Weiss as they walled around the library carrying out their duties. That was why such slight touches would give a light warning in the form of a sharp but very brief pain like an electric shock. Those who continued to touch them, however, would find the intensity increase more and more. Eventually, the warnings would stop and the magic circles would start to cause bruises and burns. I know I embroidered the magic circles alongside the others, Charlotte said proudly. Furthermore, no matter how cute they are, they remain the heirlooms of royalty. That I should never touch them without permission is obvious. The students just then, learning that Schwartz and Weiss were the heirlooms of royalty, stared at them with surprised expressions. There were clear looks of awe and submission in their faces. I see that you have already spoken to the others about Schwartz and Weiss, Lady Rosamond, so I will spare them another explanation, Solange said, raising a hand to her lips and giving a refined smile, as she looked between Schwartz and me. Might I ask you to supply Schwartz and Weiss with mana as I register the first years? They are both quite pleased to see you. Of course, I replied. We shall go to the reading room such that we are not in your way. Very well. If you wish to avoid prying eyes, there's nobody on the second floor at the moment, Solange noted with a bemused smile. It must have been clear on my face that I was just looking for an excuse to visit the reading room. And she was no doubt thinking of the time Dunkelfelger had come to complain. I similarly wanted to avoid any further conflict, so it was crucial that we remain largely unseen. And so we headed to the reading room's second floor as suggested. I see the first years getting registered really didn't matter to you at all, Cornelius remarked, as we made our way there, sounding exasperated. My duty is to supply Schwartz and Weiss with mana, I replied without even turning around. We entered the reading room with the two shoe mills in tow, ascended the staircase to our left, and then confirmed that there really was nobody around. Cornelius, stand guard at the stairs to ensure that nobody intrudes. Am I right to assume that you can manage on your own? Judith and Lenore will want to see Schwartz and Weiss, I imagine. In truth, it was best to have them on guard duty as well, but most girls really love the two shoe mills. Judith and Lenore had also helped with the embroidery, so it seemed much too sad to leave them behind. Lenore giggled at my suggestion. There is no need for that, Lady Rosamond. I, too, will guard the stairs. Are you certain? I asked. Quite. I will perform my duty as a guard today, but please do allow me to join you next time, she said, a hint of amusement in her indigo eyes. I signaled my understanding with a smile, and then continued on my way, leaving her and Cornelius behind. Ooh. Oh, I see what she was doing. She wanted to be alone with Cornelius. Just to talk, or just to be near him. We should be hidden from anyone who might climb the stairs here, Riarda noted. I nodded and extended my hand to the golden face stones on Schwartz and Weiss's heads, then stroked them gently while pouring in my mana. It seemed that they weren't too low on mana thanks to the face stones I had given Solange, but their golden eyes were closed as though they were pleased to be stroked. So I prioritized praising them without oversupplying them with mana. Schwartz, Weiss, you have done well working from spring until today. We worked hard. Solange was happy. Things will get even more difficult now that students are gathering for the winter, I said. Also, I made a friend who's going to be working with me as a library committee member. I will introduce you later. I removed my hands from Schwartz and Weiss's face stones, at which point they opened their golden eyes, blinked, and then walked further into the library. Milady, rub this too. This? I repeated confused. I followed the shoe mills to a stone statue between two bookshelves. Ooh! This is going to be interesting! I followed the shoe mills to a stone statue between two bookshelves. It was a statue of Mestinora, the goddess of wisdom, as she was holding the Grucheshite to her chest. Just as the statues in the temples held actual divine instruments, the pure white statue of Mestinora was holding a yellow leather-bound book. Impressive in size and intricately decorated, the face stones of various color dotting its cover were enough for me to determine it was a magic tool. Seeing the statue reminded me of something that Solange once said. That the library having Mestinora's protection would cause more students' transcribed material to gather here. Milady, rub here. Pray here, your job, milady. Schwartz and Weiss pointed to the Grucheshite that Mestinora was holding. I had no objection, so I placed my hand upon it and prayed. May more books be brought to the library. As I prayed, I stroked the face stones embedded in the Grucheshite. I could feel my mana starting to get sucked out, and then a great flood was drained from me all at once, far more than I had given to Schwartz and Weiss. I reflexively pulled my hand away. Did something happen, Milady Riarda asked. Her brow was furrowed. Perhaps she was concerned about my sudden reaction. I gazed between my hand and the Grucheshite, then looked around carefully to see if anything unusual was happening. Something strangely Something strange usually followed whenever a bunch of my mana was sucked out in one go. Even I was able to piece that together. And yet, nothing happened. The statue depicting Miss Denora didn't move, nor did a door to the Royalty's secret archive miraculously open. In truth, a small part of me had hoped there would be some kind of change, but alas. Still, this is strange. I see nothing's happening, I remarked. What did you do, Lady Rose? My retainers asked. Before I could even respond, however, Schwartz and Weiss answered for me. Milady's job. Gramps will be happy. Schwartz, Weiss. Who is this Gramps? I asked. It was a name I had never heard before, and to my knowledge, they called it the librarians they served Milady. But their answers only led to more confusion. Gramps is Gramps. He is old, powerful. Considering the title you've given him, he must be very old and very high in status, I ventured, probing for more information, but the response I received was a simple yes. I mean, sure, Schwartz and Weiss are cute, but they're so hard to understand at times. No amount of ruminating would answer my question, so I decided to stop thinking about the matter entirely. I would just ask Solange later, after all. As I reached this conclusion, I heard some clattering and odd exclamations from the first floor. The first years had likely been registered and taken to the reading room. Schwartz, Weiss, let us descend to the first floor, I said. You may guide the first years. I have something to discuss with Professor Solange. Understood, milady, we shall guide. And so when we headed down to the first floor, Schwartz and Weiss were somewhat limited with their language, as their explanation might not have been the clearest. But Charlotte's retainers were older students who could handle any questions that came up. Professor Solange, there is something I was hoping to discuss, I said. I went on to suggest that she keep the face stones I had received from Ferdinand with her, since I was once again forbidden from visiting the library until after I passed my classes. Please do not overexert yourself, dear, Solange said. Of course, I simply want to finish my classes as soon as possible so that I may properly establish the library committee. I very much enjoyed handling returns with Schwartz and Weiss last year. Your assistance then truly was of great help, Solange replied. We both smiled as we recalled the flood of panicked students, their arms filled with books. The return rate was so high, I would almost like for Lord Ferdinand to send more ordinances of encouragement this year as well. He will need something in return, I said. Perhaps this could be solved if we had a magic tool that could record his voice. The existence of magic tools that could record videos and magic tools like ordinances that carried voice messages had made me assume that a voice recorder would be commonplace. But apparently not. Solange blinked at me in confusion. A tool for recording voices, you say? Indeed. Are you unfamiliar with the idea? It would certainly be convenient to have one. I cannot see it being too useful outside of this one particular use, however, considering that making loud noises is improper here in the library, she explained. That reminded me, the magic tool that Ferdinand had provided to record the sword dance and dedication whirl hadn't captured any audio. I wonder whether I could ask Ferdinand or Professor Herscher to make one. That matter aside, though, will you be well, Lady Rosamine? Solange asked, her expression clouded. She cared more about the burden of supplying mana than any talk of magic tools that might not even exist. You will need much mana for your practical lessons. Is supplying Schwartz and Weiss with mana not a burden? There's nothing to worry about, I assured her. Lady Hannelore will now be working with me as a library committee member. Lady Hannelore, is that not the Archduke candidate from Dunkelfelger? Solange asked, once again looking confused. I recall that you fought with Dunkelfelger over Schwartz and Weiss. I explained that the feud between our duchies was entirely down to Lestalot acting on his own. Lady Hannelore is a sweet and kind girl who loves books and shoe mills, I concluded. Assuming there is no problem with her affinities, I even plan to share my position as Schwartz and Weiss's lady with her. Is that even possible? Oh my, in that case, I would like to have another tea party this... Oh yes, it is actually possible, because there was more than one archnoble librarian that was giving Schwartz and Weiss mana before they died. In that case, I would like to have another tea party this year before the students begin to fill the library. There's much I wish to discuss. Please do invite Lady Hannelore if you can. In an instant, I could feel my world get a whole lot brighter. This was a tea party with Solange and Hannelore in the library we were talking about here. Just thinking about it made me want to skip and dance. A tea party of bookworms then, I said. I shall contact Lady Hannelore without fail. Oh yes, Solange replied. I am looking forward to it. It was then that the library was bathed in light of all different colors, as though the sun were shining through a stained glass window. It was the alert that afternoon lessons were about to begin. I heard the first years farther inside the reading room let out noises of surprise. Then Schwartz and Weiss hurried over. Milady, the warning. We must go. Hurry. Ah, but I haven't asked about this Gramps person yet. Even so, my slow walking speed meant that we had to leave as soon as possible. I would need to ask during the tea party instead, or whenever I could next visit the library. I'll come back soon, I said. Schwartz, Weiss, please continue your work. We exited the library with Schwartz and Weiss hurrying us along. The apprentice attendants and scholars headed to their specialty buildings, while the first year's apprentice nights now returned to the main building. Sister, our first years must now go to the auditorium, Charlotte said. May we meet again soon. The first years all went to the auditorium together for their written lessons, while we second years had practical lessons. Our classrooms were split according to status, so Feline excused herself and turned a corner. Let's get Lady Rosamine to the small hall and then hurry along ourselves, Cornelia said to Lenore and Judith as they matched my slow but graceful walking speed. They would need to go to the course building to the north after seeing me off. I poured mana into my enhancement magic tools to increase my pace. I was not able to move without them, but I've been told to keep them on at all times for situations like this. I needed to go as quickly as possible while still preserving my elegance. You're going to be learning more stat transformation today, Riarda said. Pay attention, milady. You will need to know how to make these weapons and shields to protect yourselves. Ooh, I think this is what I'm thinking of. Because I remember that apparently things get nuts with what mind decides to create. Oh boy. I want to continue. Okay, I've only been doing this like 3 minutes. Okay. Stab transformation. I entered the small hall and saw that the usually pure white floor was covered with a large cloth. It was embroidered with a magic circle much like the one Ferdinand and the tax officials used for teleporting things. I examined it, wondering what it was going to be used for, when suddenly I made eye contact with Roffin. He was standing in front of the cloth with his hands on his waist and his feet planted firmly on the ground. Oh ho, Lady Rosamine, now I'm looking forward to class, he said with a grin wide enough to flash his pearly whites. I had no idea what he was so excited about, so I gave a polite smile in response and then began looking for Hannelore. I needed to invite her to the tea party for bookworms. I glanced around the hall excitedly and soon found Hannelore talking to Wilfried. It was usually best to avoid interrupting so that I wouldn't come across as rude, but that wouldn't be a problem in this case. Good day, Wilfried, Lady Hannelore. You're pretty late, Rosebud, Wilfried said. So it may seem, but I came here straight from the library, walking as fast as I could. Hannelore smiled. You were at the library, Lady Rosamine, she asked. Indeed, I supplied Schwartz and Weiss with mana while the first years were being registered. Schwartz and Weiss must be doing well, then. Now I wish to go to the library myself. As expected, Hannelore was invested in the library. My heart swelled with joy, and I moved right to talking about the tea party. I would bring it up today, then have my attendant send a formal invitation at a later date. I was speaking with Professor Solange about your wish to join the library committee, I said. Would you mind attending a tea party of bookworms, perhaps? A tea party of bookworms, she repeated. Yes, Professor Solange is the only librarian at the moment, and she cannot leave the library. She was hoping to hold a tea party while there were still few students visiting. How fares your schedule, Lady Hannelore? Let me think. Hannelore looked up toward the ceiling deep in thought. I am due to finish my written classes relatively soon, so a morning 10 or so days from now would seem feasible. In that case, I'll prepare for the tea party and invite the both of you. Of course, the tea party itself is going to be held in the library. I am looking forward to it, Hannelore said with a pleased smile. Now, a beat later, 4.5 bell rang, so we stopped our chattering and turned to face the teacher. Primavera was here too, but Roffin stood out due to the excitement shining in his eyes. All right, everyone's here, Roffin said in a loud voice after the final chime of the bell, his eyes sweeping over the gathered students. Today we're going to be morphing our stamps. Your goal for this year is to learn to make weapons and shields. Woo, boy, Professor Roffin now seems lively today. Protecting yourself and one's duchy requires power, the power to fight, and that doesn't just apply to knights, Roffin declared. He then went on to describe the role that Dunkelfelger had played in Jürgen Smith's history and extol the importance of personal combat prowess. Members of an archducal family need to have the power to protect their own duchies, he continued, his fist passionately clenched. In the end, only the Archduke can defend their foundation magic. Now, it's obvious that archnight's serving in archducal families need to have their battle prowess honed to a fine edge. But students need to be able to protect their lords and ladies too. The same goes for scholars. Danger can strike at any moment, and you can hardly call yourself a retainer if you can't even buy time for the Archduke to escape. Strength. Strength is more important than anything. The boys listened with sparkling eyes, while the girls seemed mostly disinterested. The contrast between the sexes was apparent in a glance. I did see some girls listening with enthusiasm, though. No doubt they were aiming to be apprentice knights. It's almost uncomfortable how intensely Professor Roffin feels about this, but he's not wrong. Everyone needs good offense and defense. Danger really can strike at any moment. A noble from another duchy could go on a rampage in your temple, Kidnappers could break into your duchy's castle. Of course, I was drawing from my own personal experiences, but the point remained. It was the duty of nobles with plentiful mana to protect themselves and others. It seemed the future apprentice scholars and attendants weren't quite getting it, though. They looked confused. Perhaps they hadn't experienced danger for themselves now that the Civil War was over. Primavera stepped in front of Robin with a composed smile. She looked over the girls and said in a gentle voice, I imagine many of you believe that you need only leave fighting to the knights and men. Those of you who do are gravely mistaken. Women need the power to protect themselves more than anyone. We must not allow boorish men of ill intent to get near us. Yeah. You really don't want that. You really don't want people... essentially, they're telling you need to be able to protect yourself from people who might want to rape you. Several of the previously unenthused girls snapped their heads up, now with a more serious look in their eyes. Primavera gave one brisk nod upon seeing this, then returned to the stage to Roffin. Glad to see you're all so motivated now, Roffin said. All right, let's start with shields. Each kind of weapon had its own strength and weaknesses, and apprentice knights naturally took interest in different weapons than apprentice scholars and attendants. Shields, however, were equal. After explaining his intention to start with something that applied to us all, Roffin took out several shields from the magic circle with Primavera. They were long and rectangular, with simple wind magic circles engraved into them. We made these out of metal to help you all form a consistent uniform shape, Roffin said. Envision the shield and chant Gatilt to transform your staff, like this. Roffin chanted Gatilt, and as expected, his staff morphed into a shield. The sight reminded me, during dinner last year, the apprentice knights from Dunkelfelger had used shields that were almost identical to the ones used by our own apprentice knights. I nodded to myself, realizing that this was because everyone learned to make them the same way in this class. Having the shields be a uniform size makes it easier to line them up side by side, which lets you block large-scale attacks together, Roffin continues. And since Gatilds are made of mana, they aren't heavy either. Even the frailest girl shouldn't have a problem holding one. I think it's talking about you, Rosemine. The shields were made with the expectation that knights would use them, but even so, they were comfortably light. As the frailest girl in all the room, I sure appreciated that. I moved to make one myself, at which point Roffin raised his shield high into the air to show the simple magic circle on it. Each shield should have this magic circle engraved on it, he said. This strengthens your defensive power by adding the protection of the goddess of wind. Get this circle right, and you'll have Shutsaria's shield. But then in that case, wouldn't I get better results by envisioning Shutsaria's divine instrument in the temple instead? Yeah, probably. Its magic circles were a lot more complexly woven than those on the simple shield, and it was dotted with face stones to boot. Wilma had drawn the shield for Karta in picture books, so when I made wind shields, I always envisioned the divine instrument. That said, I'm not too sure how I would turn Shutsaria's shield into a rectangle. Shutsaria's shield was, in my mind, circular, and when one wanted to protect oneself and others in a wide area, hemispherical shields were generally ideal. Making a standard rectangle shield was simple enough, but trying to overwrite what was already such a clear mental image for me was much more complicated. By trying to force things, I would probably end up making it harder for myself. To make proper wind shields from this point onward, I alone was frowning at my hands while Hannelore, Wolfried, and the others practiced Gatilt. Lady Rosemine, why are you wearing such a deep frown? Hannelore said. Is this lesson really that difficult? Wolfried added. They were both peering down at me as I continued to frown, having not even formed my staff yet. I'm struggling because Shutsaria's shield is round in my mind, I replied. We have to visualize it as a rectangle instead, but this is much too sudden of a request. Yes? Shutsaria's shield is circular. Have you seen it before, Lady Rosemine? Hannelore asked, looking at me quizzically. It seemed that the average noble didn't even know the shapes of the divine instruments, since they would never visit their temples. The divine shields that decorate shrines are circular, I explained. I would simply feel much more familiar with that shape. Why not go ask Professor Roffin if you can use a circular shield instead, then, Wolfried suggested. At this rate, I will not be able to pass in one day. I suppose it cannot hurt to try, I mused. Roffin was looking over the students as I approached, and made my request. May I use a circular shield instead? As one raised in the temple, I am much more familiar with the circular divine instrument than any other shield. I'm not a knight! I understand your problem, Lady Rosemine, but all apprentice knights need rectangular shields, he replied with a frown. You can't practice with everyone else otherwise. I struggled to understand. Perhaps it was important for apprentice knights to have uniform shields so that they could train alongside each other. But I was an Arch 2 candidate. I had no intention of fighting in any squadrons. Professor Roffin, I am an Arch 2 candidate, I said. I do not plan to fight in groups, so I am confident that a circular shield will serve me just fine. Roffin looked at me with folded arms and an even deeper frown, apparently as confused as me. You're Lord Ferdinand's disciple, and you're not going to take the night course, he asked? Why not? Why not? Because I'm not interested, I replied plainly. Duh? She's not even built for to be a knight anyway. Do you really think that this little girl is going to be able to be a knight? No! Roffin's jaw dropped so suddenly that I feared it might dislocate. He shook his head desperately and muttered, No, this can't be. Then, after a moment, his eyes widened in apparent realization. But what about dinner, he exclaimed. You can't participate in dinner without taking night courses. I do not understand why you are so surprised, Professor Roffin. I am not particularly interested in dinner to begin with. What? Hold on a second. Does he think I'm a dinner fan? The next thing I knew, Roffin was extolling the virtues of dinner. My eyes desperately flitted around the hall. I could guess that he wouldn't be willing to return to the topic of shields for quite some time. Someone, help! My pleading stare was met by none other than the Primavera. She placed a hand on her cheek, muttering, Oh dear, and then walked over with all the elegance of a calmly flowing stream. You mustn't speak of dinner so needlessly during class, Roffin. But Primavera, Lady Rosemine said. Primavera raised a hand to interrupt him. Do show us your shield, dear, she said to me with a kind smile. She positively exuded strength and flexibility despite her soft demeanor. So I nodded and started pouring mana into my staff. I closed my eyes and visualized Shutsaria's shield. I didn't have anyone to protect, so I decided that something the size of a large pot lid should do. I chanted Gatult, and a shield of Shutsaria, just like the ones I had made through prayer many times before, appeared in my hand. It was yellow to match her divine color, and purely translucent, and on its surface was a magic circle that looked on the nutshell like a complex decorative pattern. It was just as I had envisioned it. It's a divine instrument, Roffin said, surprised, staring closely at my shield. A buzz ran through the surrounding students as well. There was unfortunately no helping it, considering that I was the only person with a circular shield while everyone else focused on making rectangular ones. This is all for the sake of passing. I need to pass today. I had the professors with my shield in hand, wanting to know whether I could pass or fail. Primavera looked at the shield and then nodded with a smile. Let's see whether it functions, she said. Right. Ready your shield, Roffin declared, his expression betraying his determination. He pulled a face stone out from a little pouch at his side and pinched it between his thumb and index finger to show its size, about half as large as his thumb. Then he wound up his arm and threw the face stone at my shield. Eep! I knew that my shield would protect me, but the sight of what was essentially a rock closing in on me with such tremendous speed was terrifying nonetheless. I instinctively started pouring mana into my shield. The moment the face stone made contact, it shot back in the direction it had come from with a resounding bang. A gust of wind from my shield pushed Roffin away. At the same time, one of the bracelets on the wrist I was using to hold the shield started to glow. One of the protective charms on me had activated. It seemed to have registered the thrown face stone as a hostile attack on my person. Professor Roffin, defend yourself, I shouted. A counterattack is coming. Gatult. Roffin must have been used to battle, as his expression changed the instant he saw my bracelet begin to glow. He leaped up and formed a shield at the same time as I shouted my warning. A breath later, a attack magic shot out of my bracelet and threw straight at him. His quick reaction meant he was able to block it, which made me sigh in relief. What was that, Lady Rosemine, he asked. A charm that Ferdinand gave me for protection in case something happened. You're lucky that since you only threw a face stone and nothing else, the charm's counterattack was at minimum power. That was minimum power? Roffin yelped. He was looking at me in wide-eyed shock, but the charm had activated was the weakest of all the brutal and terrifying ones that Ferdinand was affording me. The attack wouldn't have proven fatal. It would have hurt to high heaven, but Roffin would have survived. Incidentally, Ferdinand had mentioned the most brutal of all the charms likewise wouldn't kill the attacker. I could still remember the twisted grin he had worn when telling me, Oh, Ferdinand, why are you getting excited about that? My reason for having these charms is a secret, I said. Now that aside, do I pass? You did manage to create a divine instrument. Very well, your shield passes, Lady Rosemine, Primavera said with a smile. Having completed my task, I chanted Ruckin to return my staff to its original form, and decided to return to Wilfried and Hannelore. The moment I turned around, however, everyone stepped aside, opening a path for me. Oh no! The fear that tinged their expression was no doubt directed at Ferdinand's charms. Still, they had gone through the trouble of allowing me past, so I walked through them and over to Wilfried. I passed. It seems that while apprentice knights must have uniform shields, and archduke candidates such as I may use a circular design, I said to him informatively. Rosemine, is that really all you have to say about what just happened? Wolfried asked, cradling his head in his hands. I racked my brain for what else he might want me to explain. Let's see. Oh, right, the divine instrument shield uses more complex magic circles, which apparently boosts its defense. Since you will not be taking the night course either, Wolfried, you might want to make one as well. That's not what I meant. You sure have some deadly charms, huh? Couldn't you at least take them off during practical lessons? You're clearly putting everyone in danger, Wolfried clarified, his brow furrowed as he shook his head at me. He was right that these charms were dangerous, but they would only activate when I was attacked. More importantly, Ferdinand had deemed it necessary for me to wear them. I couldn't just remove them without consulting him. It's not my intention to bring danger to others, I said. I will allow you to remove them, but only if you can acquire permission from Ferdinand. Will you consult him? Wolfried immediately shook his head in response, wearing the fake smile of a noble all the while. That's enough focusing on shields, Raffen announced. If you want to practice more, do it on your own time. Handler exhaled. She could make a shield on the spot, but adding the magic circle was proving too much for her. Wolfried, meanwhile, was agonizing over whether he should go with the standard rectangular shield that everyone else was using, or the more powerful divine shield. It seemed that he was feeling quite pressured, since he needed to decide and start locking the images in his mind. He was having such a hard time precisely because he knew Shitsaria's shield so clearly from Karta and the Bible. I spent the whole lesson thinking about this, Wolfried groaned. You're not being denied your paradise until you finish your classes, Wolfried. So I would suggest you take your time and relax. That is how you came up with your crest and blazoned staff last year, correct? I asked. He had spent a lot of time agonizing over that too. With enough time, perhaps he would think of an impressive-looking shield as well. As we continued our conversation, Raffen and Primavera began taking weapon after weapon out of the teleportation circle. They lined up a sword, a spear, a scythe, an axe. I noted they were all melee weapons. No bows, I see. Strange, since Ferdinand used one, I muttered to myself. Bows are more complicated, I am told, since it requires so much practice to shoot them accurately. That's why they are not taught here in this basic class, Handler explained, evidently having overheard me. Archery is the first taught in the night course. Your knowledge is impressive, Lady Handler, I replied. Dunkelfogger has a greater proportion of knights than our duchies, so the apprentice knights always end up at the center of a conversation in our dorm. Handler said shyly, lowering her eyes. It seemed that the mood there was similar to a boy's locker room back on Earth. I hope the quiet, book-loving Handler didn't stick out too much. Next up are weapons, Raffen said. I'm sure that though some of the would-be scholars in attendance among us have never seen these up close before. Pick the one you like the most and form your staff into it. Apprentice knights will need to learn to wield a sword and one other weapon, understood? With that, everyone moved over to the weapons. Wolfried seemed to be walking in a particular hurry. He was probably fairly interested in them too. Chance Schwert for a sword, Lawns for a spear, Reichel for a scythe, Axe for an axe, and... As Raffen listed the chants for the various weapons, I thought about which I would prefer. In terms of actually creating the weapon, spears would most likely be the simplest. I could immediately visualize Leidenschaft's spear thanks to having seen it on a daily basis and even holding it in my hands before. The problem is whether I could actually use it. Lady Rosamond, will you not be looking at the weapons? Handler asked. I do not need to, I replied. I can already create one. You can? Is it perhaps another divine instrument? Her right eye sparkled as she leaned forward, gazing at me intently. She looked so hopeful, and I would never let a friend of mine down. Lady Handler, would you like to see Leidenschaft's spear? May I? I took out my staff and closed my eyes, visualizing Leidenschaft's spear. It was the same weapon I had used to slay the Schneesturm, and it was so thoroughly engraved in my memory that I could even remember the number and size of the face stones embedded into it. Beneath thick ashen clouds prowled the Schneesturm, the source of the pure white blizzard, buffeting the flurry of yellow capes fighting to end the winter. Above it all, I was gripping Leidenschaft's spear, pouring in my mana until it reached its limit and started to glow blue. The magic circles were clear in my mind. Lawns, a spear just as I envisioned, appeared in my hands. Perhaps because I had been visualizing the Schneesturm battle, it was pulsating with blue light as though it were filled with mana, which made it look especially threatening. Is that Leidenschaft's spear? Handler whispered, awestruck. It looks so beautiful. Raffen grimaced at the glowing spear and ran over. Rosamund, what is that? He demanded, clearly on guard. Leidenschaft's spear. I was raised in the temple, so it's the weapon I'm most familiar with, I replied. It was a pre-prepared answer intended to explain my familiarity with the divine instruments. Do I need to test this as well, Professor Raffen? With that much mana in it, who knows what might happen, Raffen muttered. I'll give you a passing grade, just unmorph it, please. He went on to groan that he could have seen its destructive power within his own eyes had we only been in the night building, but that wasn't too bad. I chanted Ruckin and returned my staff to its usual form. Lady Rosemite, I thank you ever so much for showing me such a wondrous sight, Hannelore said. Lady Shaft's spear was a little too cumbersome for me to want as my primary weapon, but I have received a passing grade and my friend was happy. Everything worked out in the end. Do you not need to see the weapons either, Lady Hannelore, I asked. I am already familiar with them. The problem is deciding on which one to settle on, she replied. I am not proficient in any one weapon in particular, so I am struggling to envision what would serve me best in a defensive capacity. I suppose I am not particularly skilled with spears. Perhaps I will still need to think of something better to protect myself with. I started pondering the matter with Hannelore. Spears were out of the question for someone of my build, and swinging a sword around seemed impossible. I wanted something lighter and simpler. In terms of ranged weapons, I could probably manage better with a crossbow, even if they are on the weaker side. I could even copy Ferdinand and have my arrows split apart into a rain of death to cover up my bad aim a little. It seemed beyond obvious that I was less of a melee fighter and should specialize in long-range combat. That way I could attack both offensively and defensively. It was cowardly, sure, but it was exactly what I wanted. I cared more about my safety than my honor. The best weapon for me is one that's easy to use, and that I can use while riding Leslie. Unfortunately enough, during my Arano days, I hadn't really been one to use weapons. Maybe a butcher knife or a sculpting knife could double as a weapon, but I don't want to use either of them. They probably wouldn't be very useful during a Phoebus attack either. Not that I really know, though. I'm such a pacifist that I never considered using them for violence. Oh, but I have been on the receiving end of attack before. I recall the time Shu had taken a toy gun and shot at me when we were kids. The tip would flash with light and make a noise to simulate gunshots. We had demanded that we play dead, so I'd roll around on the ground and read. Once summer came, he often shot me in the back while I was focused on my books. Water gun? I whispered to myself. All of a sudden, oh no. The stab in my hand was replaced with a translucent, cheap-looking water gun perfect for kids. Wow, it looks like pathetically weak. Oh no! Here we go, guys. How did she do that? She didn't even chant a spell. Is the Japanese word for water gun gonna be a spell? Dear Lord. Okay, do I want to continue? Yes, I do. Strengthening the weapon. I couldn't imagine the gun in my hand serving as a very competent weapon. A spurt of water was hardly dangerous enough to be effective. Lady Rosamund, whatever might you be holding, Hannelore asked, is a weapon? Before I could even respond, Roffin raced over and stared down at the water gun in my hand. Is this a new weapon you've invented? He exclaimed. It's such an immediate response that I started to suspect he had been listening in on our conversation. No, I shot back. It's nothing that's significant. In fact, it's merely a children's toy. No. Looks to me like this is some grand new creation that's going to change warfare as we know it. Could you demonstrate it for me? No! Don't do it! Don't do it! Robert asked. His booming voice had caught the attention of all those in earshot, and their prying eyes seemed to ask what crazy thing I was about to do next. I wish they would just turn back around. They're staring at me like I'm waist-deep in dangerous weapons, and then there's the whole ordeal with my deadly charms. It's not fair. I'm not violent. This is just a toy. The whispers I was hearing were surely not positive ones. I had already received a passing grade for morphing my staff, so I wanted nothing more than to run away and take refuge in the library. Come on, Lady Rosemite, strike your enemies, Roffin declared. He pointed at some dummies wrapped in cloth, which he had apparently set up at some point. They must have been made for testing out the specs of transformed weapons. I could see a boy who is presumably an apprentice knight swinging a sword at one. He wants me to stand next to that cool, powerful-looking boy and squirt a target with a water gun? I'm gonna have so lame. Either it's gonna be powerful or it's gonna be weak, and they're gonna make her get it stronger. I tried to shake the embarrassing thought from my mind and looked up at Roffin. As I said, this is a mere toy. It's not usable as a weapon. So you want to hide your new weapon, huh? I'd expect nothing less from Ferdinand's disciple. I am not attempting to hide anything. There is simply nothing for me to show. I want to see it, Roffin said, his fist clenched in determination. The sparkle in his eyes made it unfortunately clear just how excited he was about my water gun. Well, I mean, when you shoot it, it's not going to shoot water. I'd imagine it would shoot your mana out. I imagine. That would make sense. At this point, I had no choice but to show it, to prove to him how ill-suited of a weapon it really was. I'll turn that look of hope into one of despair. The other students crowded around to watch as I stopped in front of the cloth-wrapped dummy. A heavy silence had fallen over the hall, so absolute that I could hear those swallowing nervously. All eyes were on me, and their stares burned. Observe, I said, pointing a gun at the dummy. My form was perfect, and with that I pulled a tiny trigger. Spurt! A spout of water shot from my gun, traveled a short distance through the air, and then struck the floor perhaps a few inches short of the dummy. The splash glimmered for a brief moment before disappearing entirely. Told you. It seems that the gun used my mana rather than actual water, and since the mana had disappeared on its own, there was nothing for me to clean up. How wonderful. I was personally quite impressed with the display, but everyone else looked somewhat baffled. Roffin shook his head as though he couldn't or simply didn't want to understand. Lady Rosemine, what in the world? He asked carefully. That didn't look like much of a weapon to me. I did tell you, this is only a children's toy. Can I ask what it actually used for? Surprising people, I suppose? I see. Well, you succeeded there, Roffin said, slumping his shoulders with a look of indescribable disappointment. As I chanted Ruckin to revert my stab, I hoped his despair was severe enough for him to stop inviting me to dinner games. Once my water gun was gone, the other students lost interest and returned to their own practice. I let out a sigh of relief, freed from the peanut gallery at last, and returned to Handler. She looked sick with worry. My sincerest apologies, Lady Rosemine, she said nervously. It was because of my own misunderstanding that Professor Roffin made such a scene. You said from the beginning that it was only a toy, but he refused to relent. Wilfred shook his head. It's not your fault, Lady Handler, he noted, trying to console her. Please do not let it bother you, I added. Professor Roffin jumped to his own conclusions. The blame does not rest on you. But Professor Roffin overheard your comment and nothing more. It was just a bit of unfortunate timing. Oh, the unfortunate timing thing again. I suppose, Handler said with a nod. A weak smile formed on her face as I consoled her, but for some reason she seemed even more depressed than before. 6 bell rang before long, and our staff morphing class came to an end. After dinner, Wilfred and I called over our retainers so that we could give our reports on the events of the day's practical lessons. We told them how I had surprised everyone by making Shitsaria's shield and Leidenschaft's spear, how one of Ferdinand's defensive charms had shot back at Roffin during class, and how I had made a water gun. You made Shitsaria's shield and Leidenschaft's spear? A defensive attack during a test. We are lucky Professor Roffin was the proctor. This could have become quite the incident had Professor Fraulein been the target. Oh, yeah, definitely. She would have milked that for all that it was worth. Everyone began commenting on the matter with wide eyes, but even then one thing was clear. Nobody was more surprised about Ferdinand's charm activating than me. Maybe I was a bit late in counting my blessings, but given how Fraulein viewed me as an enemy, I certainly was glad that it hadn't been her. Show some sympathy for us, Wilfred groaned. Your retainers are 90 to mention all this in our reports back to Ehrenfest. Think about how we feel. Well, it's not her fault! I shot him a stern look, and then recalled how much our guardians had agonized over Wilfred writing such unclear and incomplete reports. No doubt he and his apprentice scholars had gotten much better at composing reports since then. Shall I write them in your place, then, I suggested, so that you can leave out anything that reflects badly on you? Not at all, I gasped, fixing him with an offended glare. I would write only the truth, in brief and concise language. Cornelius gave a heavy sigh. And your brief, concise reports containing only the truth would probably be nothing more than... I practiced my practical lessons again. From the bottom of my heart, I am grateful that you and Lord Wilfrid are in the same grade, Lady Rosemine. Your reports are much too lacking. Talk about rude. Our lesson had been about transforming one staff into a shield and then a weapon, and I had managed both successfully. Where else was there to report? I was a child raised in the temple, so my guardians would surely understand that I could only make Shitsaria's shield, and the water gun was simply a toy that had ended up disappointing Roffin. Ferdinand would probably want to know how his charms had reacted to the face stone for research purposes, but that was about it. If you are dissatisfied with my methods, then you may write the report as you wish, I said. I have done nothing that I would not want them to hear. You've got it all mixed up, Rosemine. They asked you not to do anything that would demand reports like this in the first place, Wilfrid said. It must have been a fair point, as Riarda gave a firm nod in agreement. In contrast to everyone else, Hartmut seemed fascinated. He leaned forward with an unmistakable sparkle in his eyes. Splendid, Lady Rosemine. I believe that Shitsaria's shield and Leidenschaft's spear are perfect for the state of Ehrenfest. As loath as I am to rave under parade, Hartmut, spears are unwieldy and not my weapon of choice. I do not have the strength to aim and throw them at my target, I said. It was only because Ferdinand had been there to help me that I had managed to strike the snowstorm. If someone had told me to do that on my own, I could say with complete confidence that I would fail. This is what enhancements are for, Lady Rosemine. Hartmut, I am learning enhancement magic so that I can return some semblance of normalcy to my everyday life, not so I can throw massive spears. I could move around without my enhancement magic tools now, but only at a lumber. I still required them to have any chance of walking at the same speed as everyone else. I was already at a disadvantage due to my small stature, which meant I needed the help of others to achieve a lot of what I wanted to do. But you will need a weapon to use when the time comes, Hartman said. If a spear is too unwieldy, then you must think of an effective alternative. What shall you do? I do understand my need for a weapon, I replied. If possible, I would prefer something that can be used from a distance while riding my high beast, perhaps something I could hold in one hand and use through the window. The apprentice knights exchanged conflicting glances. With one hand, Lady Rosemine, can you even hold a dagger with two? Are the charms you received from Lord Ferdinand not meant to be your weapons, Lady Rosemine? They weren't wrong. Ferdinand had determined that I needed those charms precisely because he couldn't count on my fighting capabilities. I'm done thinking about this, Wolfried interjected. She passed her classes, and Uncle's charms will serve her well enough. End of discussion. I'll write the report. And with that, our meeting came to an end. I returned to my room and rolled around in my bed, pondering the weapons that Wolfried had just told me not to bother thinking about. Ferdinand's charms were powerful, but I didn't want to be entirely reliant on them. It was easy to imagine scenarios where I was surrounded by threats and ended up running out of them. Leidenschaft's spear might not have been a good match for me, but I still needed a weapon, preferably one that wasn't a children's toy. If only I had a real gun instead of a toy water gun, I muttered deep in thought, and then a realization struck me. Wait a minute. All I did was say water gun, right? I didn't actually chant a spell. I seem to recall that chanting a spell was necessary to make other weapons. It was possible to recreate the shape without one, but the spell was necessary to make the staff actually function as a sword or a spear. I took out my staff, confused, and whispered, water gun again. This time nothing happened. Why? Oh, because I wasn't visualizing it. I shut my eyes, visualized the water gun, and then said the words again. This time my staff transformed. Further experimentation was clearly needed. I reverted my staff to its usual form, pictured a sword, and then said sword in Japanese. That didn't work. My staff morphed when I visualized divine instruments and chanted the spell, but not when I spoke in Japanese. I couldn't figure out the pattern. Nothing in the vein of printer, photocopier, or scissors seemed to work either. The only thing that I could make by speaking in Japanese was a cheap-looking toy water gun. Perhaps there were other items that could work, but I had no way to figure out what they were. I took the translucent water gun and fired it a few times from where I was lying on the bed. The water inside disappeared almost immediately upon hitting something, and even when I shut my covers, they didn't become the slightest bit wet. Most curious of all, however, was that the amount of water inside never seemed to decrease. I could use it as much as I wanted until my mana ran out. I wonder whether I can power up the water gun somehow. I could grip the water gun comfortably in one hand, meaning I could steer my panda bus with the other, and using it was as easy as squeezing the trigger. No reloading was necessary either, since it automatically used my mana as ammunition. That's what I thought. I just needed to improve its range and power. Then it was likely to be the perfect weapon for me. When it comes to using water as a weapon, I suppose there are water jet cutters, but just how much pressure would it take to kill a person using one of those? I can't really imagine it. Maybe I could try using a fire hose or something to blast out a ton of water? Nah, I could just use washing in that case. No need to modify a water gun. I played with the weight of the water gun in my hand as I made, and then shot down my own suggestions. The mana inside, which looked entirely like water, sloshed around. Seeing as this is mana and not water, perhaps I could make it come out as the arrows that Ferdinand uses, like when he was fighting the Trombe. I could just shoot, and I pulled the trigger, thinking about how cool it would be if an arrow shot out, and then one actually did. That one arrow soon became several, presumably because I had been thinking about the time Ferdinand hunted the Trombe, and then tore through the canopy above my bed. The arrows disappeared once they reached the ceiling, but the damage was already done. Well, that happened. I was blinking in surprise at the torn canopy when Rayarda rushed over and threw aside my bed curtains. "Milady, what happened?" she cried. What do I do?" Rayarda saw the water gun in my hand and the holes above my bed and immediately pieced together the situation. Her eyebrows shot up in anger, and she regarded me with a gaze so sharp it was like a razor. Moments later, lightning struck. "Milady, what are you thinking using your staff in bed? Put away that dangerous weapon and go straight to sleep." "Sorry, I'll go to sleep right away," I squeaked. I chanted Ruckin to put rid of my water gun and then immediately retreated underneath my covers. I'm so sorry. I don't think it would actually shoot out arrows." "Well, you didn't think that it would, but I mean, hello." We made our way to the dining hall for breakfast the next morning. Once all my retainers were gathered, Rayarda let out a sigh. "Last night, Milady experimented with her step in bed and shot her canopy to pieces with a so-called water gun, she said. Hartmut, add that to your reports in the castle. Lady Rosamund, it's dangerous to handle weapons in bed, Feline added, blinking at me incredulously. I averted my eyes. The events of yesterday's practical lesson was one thing, but I was absolutely going to be lectured for this. Didn't you say the water gun was a toy and not a weapon just yesterday? It was! Cornelius asked, making no attempt to hide his exasperation. It truly was supposed to be a toy, I replied. But since it contained my mana rather than water, I wondered whether I could make it shoot arrows and whether those arrows could then split apart. I gave it a try and, well, my canopy ended up a sacrifice for scientific progress. Lady Rosamund, may I see this water gun? Hartmut asked, leaning closer. Me too, Judith added, her violet eyes sparkling with excitement. You can fire arrows with a single hand, right? Do you think I could use one too? You could try. Despite their exhaustion, my other retainers seemed equally curious about my water gun. Shall we go to the gathering spot before morning class? Lenore suggested. It would be too dangerous to use this new weapon in the dormitory, and although we could use it somewhere else outside, I worry that the snow might be bad for Lady Rosamund's health. Probably a good idea. Everyone agreed with her assessment, as it was decided that I would debut my water gun at the gathering spot. We headed there immediately after breakfast. The others in the common room asked where we were going as they studied, but Hartmut deftly evaded their questions. We flew through the air on our high beasts until we eventually reached the pillar of yellow light. It was still strange to see one spot without any snow, but either way, due to all the fey beasts that converged at the gathering spot, the nights would end up very busy once we were inside. Once we get inside, I will use an attack whether there is a fey beast or not. Knights, stay by my side. Do not get in front of me under any circumstances, I said. Right? Here I go. Water gun. I focused my mind and morphed my staff into a water gun. Then with my left hand still on the wheel of my panda bus, I extended my right as far as I could out the window and aimed toward the gathering spot. Eep! My vision twisted for a moment as though I were passing right through a magic barrier, and an instant later, I saw several fey beasts in front of me. I eyed one and while visualizing Ferdinand slaying the Trombe, pulled the trigger of my water gun. Liquid mana shot out and turned into a glowing arrow, which split apart and started downward. It wasn't long before several of the arrows pierced one of the fey beasts. Nice! Yes! I cried. Ooh! Echoed Hartmut. The fey beast wavered for a moment at the sudden attack, and then bared its teeth at us. Although my rain of arrows had struck their mark, none had managed a killing blow. Defeating a fey beast's one move is definitely not so easy. Go, Cornelius shouted as he sped up on his high beast and then plunged toward the fey beast. His sword was already in his hand, and he slew the fey beast in the blink of an eye. We have seen the strength of Lady Rosamund's weapon, Lenore called. Let us depart at once. And so we turned straight around to return to the dorm. We only had 3 apprentice knights with us, which wouldn't have been enough to deal with all the fey beasts if we attracted too many. I couldn't kill the fey beasts even with my new weapon, I mumbled, unable to contain my sadness. I wanted to impress everyone by slaying several with a single blow, but reality was not so kind. You just need to work on that. No, but you did more than enough, Cornelius said, trying to console me. I was surprised by how much damage you did to that fey beast. There's no doubt in my mind that your attack would have killed a weaker one. Apparently the fey beasts we had encountered were on the stronger side. That was an amazing weapon, but not one I think I could use, Judith said, eyeing my water gun with regret. I don't have enough mana to shoot out that many arrows at once. My water gun was small, light, and easy to grip in one hand, but its attack power was fiercely dependent on one's mana quantity. Truly, it was a weapon made for me, although it kind of stopped being a water gun the moment it fired out arrows. Even so, it was unexpectedly strong and convenient to use, so I decided to take it as my weapon of choice. I could slowly improve it over time. Oh, with Ferdinand's help, definitely. In which case, it doesn't even need to be a water gun anymore. I want to make it cooler, a more realistic black, maybe. Like the ones you get in hard-boiled fiction. We returned to the dorm, and while everyone else was busy with their studies, I alone struggled to change the appearance of my water gun. I didn't want one that was cheap-looking and translucent. Another failure. Unfortunately, I had never even touched a toy version of a black gun, so I wasn't properly visualizing one. No matter how much I tried, I couldn't get a clear image in my mind, and my staff didn't take the shape I wanted. The most I seemed to manage was giving my current water gun a black tinge, but it was still translucent, which was very uncool. No, at this rate I won't even be as hard-boiled as an egg. I'm just a soft, squishy, soft-boiled one. Now, milady, enough with that frown. Let's get to the auditorium, Riarda said, hurrying me along. Today is the day you've been waiting for, but everyone passes at once. Focus on the written lessons, not your staff. I returned my staff to its usual form, albeit regretfully. Getting everyone to pass came first. I could focus on improving my water gun once that was over and done with. One day I'll have a super cool gun, then everyone will think I'm hard-boiled. Okay. Let us finish this, and I will see you all in the next one.